Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Virtually 2024, Nomensa's free virtual web accessibility and digital inclusion conference. For our second virtually session, we have Catherine Weston, who is digital producer at the Royal National Lifeboat Institution, more commonly known as the RNLI. The RNLI is a charity that's been saving lives at sea for over 200 years. It is primarily powered by donations and volunteers, ordinary people doing extraordinary things, supported by expert staff, all working together to help communities at home and abroad save lives. Over the past 5 years, they've been working at making accessibility part of everything they do. And Catherine is going to take you through their journey, things they've learned and what worked well to set up accessibility in their organisation. We're joined this week by My Clear Text, who are providing live captions. You can access these by clicking on the closed caption button at the bottom of Zoom, or alternatively, we will drop a stream text link in the chat for a fully accessible page of captions. Please, as always, do get involved in the discussion in the chat. Let us know where you're watching from, and just make sure your chat settings are turned to everyone and not panelists and hosts, and that way everyone can see your messages. Also, please submit your questions for Catherine using the Q&A function. I will try and get through as many as I can at the end. Finally, this session will be recorded. We'll be sending out the videos of all of this week's talks as soon as they're ready, shortly after the event. Without further ado, I'll hand over to you, Catherine, to kick things off.
Thanks, Henry. Yeah, I'm Catherine. I'm a digital producer at the RNLI, and I've been working on embedding accessibility across our organisation over the last 4 or 5 years. Today, I'm going to go through how we started off from really nothing at all to where we are today. And along the way, I'm going to share some tips and tricks that we have learned so you can embed them earlier on in your accessibility journey. We're still working on our accessibility maturity and we've got a way to go. So I'll also share with you some of the things that we're planning to do next. So as Henry said, we are the RNLI, the charity that saves lives at sea, and every day people get into danger in the water, and we are aiming to save everyone. Like people have been doing for 200 years before us. We've recently had our 200th birthday. We work in the UK, in Ireland, and internationally in order to prevent drowning and to keep other people safe. Our crew are mainly volunteers, and they are ordinary people doing other jobs who are doing extraordinary things, volunteering with us to save lives. They come from a variety of backgrounds, all walks of life. We have florists to farmers to estate agents and engineers who all volunteer to go out on the boats. About 97% of RNLI people are volunteers, which is a lot of people. They're crew members, shore crew, lifeguards, thousands of fundraisers. So with tens of thousands of volunteers and about 2,500 staff across the UK, Ireland, Channel Islands, Isle of Man, part of the challenge we had was how do we raise awareness of digital accessibility and how do we embed that when we've got so many people doing different things in different locations and with different time commitments as well. So just to also give you an understanding of kind of what we do as an organisation, we provide a 24-hour search and rescue service around the UK and Ireland, going up to 100 nautical miles offshore. We have 238 operational lifeboat stations around the UK and Ireland, and around 1,600 lifeguards keep families and people safe at the seaside every summer across 238 beaches. In 2002, 39,680 people were aided and 506 lives saved by RNLI crews and lifeguards. And we reached 14 million people with water safety messaging. So that's another challenge. Not only do we have our volunteers and staff in the hundreds of thousands, we're also potentially reaching up to 14 million people. And we want to make sure that those safety messages are accessible as well. So that's kind of a bit of a background of the challenge when we started. So before we get into that, kind of the impact of where we've gotten to, and we know we're not finished yet, but we've already started to have an impact. For example, our users know what areas of our sites are and are not accessible, so they can choose the best method of completing the task for them. Accessibility is increasingly be considered at the design stage, which saves time and money. Individuals and teams across the RNLI are more and more aware of accessibility and starting to apply accessible practices to their work. Our champions and our digital team have developed new skills and knowledge, and we're kind of building on that all the time. And by making our content more accessible, we're making sure that more people can access our safety information, can apply for jobs and volunteer roles, and fundraise for us and make a donation. Our people, some of the things that we are linking this to is our organizational objectives, and that's one of kind of the tips I'll give you later. So everything to do with accessibility, I link to two of our objectives, which are our people love being part of the RNLI, and our future is sustainable and secure. Just to mention, I have images throughout the presentation. They are mostly just kind of decorative, and I'll let you know if there's any that are not. So firstly, how are we set up? So we have a digital experience team, and it's made up of website platform specialists, data analytics specialists, and digital experience specialists. We also have an in-house creative team, and they create all our images, videos, copy, brand and like component design for the website. Um, so we've kind of got that in-house. And we look after 6 websites, and we also support on our shop website as well. So there's kind of 6 and a bit. We use a sprint process for any of our website development. And just to mention as well, we didn't start off with any extra budget or resource for accessibility. What we've done is embedded it into our existing sprint and project budgets, and it's part of the responsibilities of existing roles. So if you're coming from an organization where you don't have any budget to start, you don't have any resource to start, it is possible. It can be trickier, but there are ways to do it, and hopefully I'll be able to share those with you today. So how did we get started? So in 2018, I'm sure you know the public sector body accessibility regulations came in. They don't actually apply to us as the organisation we are, but they did provide us with a framework for how to approach accessibility. And we wanted to make sure that as many people as possible can interact with us in a way that works for them. So to start off with, we focused on web accessibility and our main website, rnli.org. And we were mainly keeping it within the digital team as well. And we started to learn more and more about accessibility, and we started to do a website audit of our main site as well. And that's top tip number 1, is there are loads of brilliant free resources out there to learn about accessibility, from kind of beginner's guides to things that are much more in depth. There's loads of newsletters you can sign up to. So yeah, there's loads out there if you're starting out. As we were doing the audit, we started to understand the scale of the task that we were working on, and it's quite big. And when you've got multiple websites, that's a lot as well. So we focused on our main website, we audited it, and we published our accessibility statement. And we used the template provided by the Government Digital Service. We just tweaked it slightly to fit with the regulations that we work to. So we work to WCAG 2.0 AA standard. We wanted to make sure that as we were kind of fixing things and noticing where there were issues we needed to fix, we wanted to make sure it was standardized across the organization, and that if anyone else was going to work on it and we knew we were going to need help because it was a big job, we wanted to make things as simple as possible. And so what we did was we set up a team site, anyone can join it, and we've divided it into channels by task. So, for example, we've got a channel for auditing, a channel for accessibility statements, a channel for learning and training, things like that. And we provided any templates we had and step-by-step instructions, so someone can go in, find what they want, and understand kind of what they need to do. In reality, though, it is mostly used by the champions, but it is kind of a helpful reminder to them of any steps. If, for example, if they haven't done an audit for a while, they know where the resources are to go and check their memory on it. Once we'd completed our accessibility audit, we had a big list of issues that we needed to fix. So that was our next step of how do we take all these issues we've got and start putting them into our development process that we already have. Um, so we use a ticketing system where we feed in things into development sprints. And so we converted all of our issues into tickets. But then we realized, okay, well, how are we going to prioritize and organize these tickets to get them into the sprints? Do some things, are they more important than others? And so what we did was we developed a scoring matrix to prioritize those tickets. And that was based off a scoring matrix we already used for other development we wanted to do. So here is an image of our scoring matrix. It's a little bit small, but essentially it's an Excel spreadsheet that gives you categories across time needed to fix an issue and validate it, how many people it's going to affect across does it affect a single page, does it affect a component, does it affect forms, or is it a site-wide issue, how much of a blocker it is to someone actually completing the task, and the web content accessibility guideline level as well. Each of those categories are scored 1 to 5, and then those are added up to give a final total out of 25. And then that meant that we could kind of start ordering all our tickets into the score they had. When we started out, we tried to fit accessibility tickets into sprints in any gaps based on their priority score. However, we've since realized we can actually be a lot more efficient if we looked at any other planned development going in, for example, for aesthetic reasons or functionality reasons, and if we could kind of add on any accessibility to those. So, for example, if we knew a hero image component was being worked on, we can attach now any accessibility tickets that relate to hero images as acceptance criteria. So we're kind of adding them on to something that's already happening. So we're not really taking up any extra space in the sprint, and it means we're getting through our backlog a lot faster. We still put accessibility tickets in on their own, but by doing it this way, it gets through a much higher volume of tickets. So that's another tip that I'll give you is if you can attach accessibility requirements to anything you know is already going to happen, that can make things go a lot faster and get through things a lot quicker. And this is probably one of those things that I wish we had thought about a lot earlier in the process, but it's great that we're doing it now. So as I said earlier, we realized how big a task this was going to be for us. So we realized we needed to start getting more people involved. We also wanted to make sure that we kind of weren't fixing things only for them to kind of more errors to be coming in their place. So we realized we needed to A, raise awareness, and B, get other people involved. So to start off with, we set up a Viva Engage, at the time it was called Yammer group, to raise awareness across the organisation. And we started out by posting an accessibility criteria of the week. So we worked through all the WCAG guidelines and tried to explain them in plain English and give examples from our website where possible, and break it down for people who maybe didn't have that technical knowledge or were working in an area where they were kind of only seeing the front end result. It's open to anyone. And we also share articles, webinars, podcasts, anything like that. Anyone can post, and it's somewhere that we're just trying to get people part of the conversation, starting to raise their awareness. We also realized after a while that we couldn't be experts in digital in every aspect of accessibility. There was just too much for a team of our size. So what we thought was, okay, let's set up a network of champions. And to start with, we focused on very specific areas, so we could share best practice with them. They could feed in any concerns or any work they were doing to us. And we could also try and maintain a level of accessibility compliance. But also, they would then specialize in their areas. So, for example, we spoke to our video team that sits within our creative team. We spoke to our editors. We spoke to our social media team and said, we'd like a representative to join the champions. And we are now getting to the point with some of those champions that they hold that knowledge. So the video team, for example, they are experts in video accessibility now, and they probably know more about it than we do in digital. And that's great because it means we can have the confidence that we know kind of in-depth web accessibility, but we know we've got someone else that we can refer to who works with videos on a day-to-day. And it also means that they're leveling up their team at the same time. They can monitor compliance in a way that we can't, because as I said, we're dotted all over the place. We're a huge organization, so we kind of need people sitting in these different teams who can share accessibility best practice and ensure that people are implementing it as well. Um, so we also trained our champions when we started off. We trained them in what is a disability, some disability models, so the medical model versus the social model, what accessibility is, because a lot of people were coming from a point of kind of starting from scratch, what assistive technology is, what the web content accessibility guidelines were, how we wanted to work together as a network, where they could go to find more resources. And then we have trained a group of them as well to be able to carry out an accessibility audit as well. So that was kind of our staff, but then we also have volunteers. And one of the roles we have is called a lifeboat press officer. And they are usually assigned to a station and part of that station, and they will be writing up press releases or news stories and publishing them on our website directly. So that was another source of content coming in that we wanted to try and minimize any errors before they got published on the website. So we reached out to our media team, and they train our volunteer lifeboat press officers, and we offered them a set of top tips on accessibility. We didn't want to be giving them another set of, you have to do this, this is kind of strict guidelines. It was more, this is a way you can make your content more accessible to the people you want it to reach. So that's the next top tip, is trying to identify any points of potential accessibility issues and then reaching out to those teams and engaging them in the accessibility process. So we've done our audit. We're starting to tackle where accessibility issues might come from, but we also need to kind of keep up with any that are happening and slipping through the net. So um, one of the ways we do that is we use some automated testing software. So we use Site Improve on a monthly basis, but I know there's lots of different ones out there. Um, we then have one of our digital team triages those errors, and they notice if anything will require development, and they'll set off the kind of development ticket process. But we also look for anything that is editable. So anything like alt text, links, link text. Um, we seem to get a lot of things to do with bullet points, accidentally adding a secret one at the end you can't actually see, but a screen reader or assistive tech can pick up. So we kind of look for those things so we can remove them. Our team are divided into each member of the team has a responsibility for a different area of the website. So, for example, one person looks after the safety section, one looks after fundraising, things like that. And so these errors are divided out to the team based on the section they appear in. This also helps the team kind of understand where any errors are going on, preventing them in future when they're building things in future as well. And then once a month, we have a drop in where it's an hour long. People can drop in if they want, and they can fix the errors in that session. They can just use it as a blocked out hour in their calendar to fix those issues. Or sometimes, if there's something a bit more complicated or in depth that we want to kind of pull apart as a team, we can use that time to do that. Um, what we've also done is aligned our technical search engine optimization process to the accessibility process. So we've done it that way round just because of how we were setting up processes. It might be that you already have another process that you can align your accessibility one to. So for us, this makes it as simple as possible for the team because the processes are the same, the documents are similar. So they know that once a month, they are going to receive a spreadsheet, and it's going to have any either accessibility issues in it or tech SEO issues in it. Um, it will tell them what page it's on, what the issue is, what they need to do to fix it, and what the status is. They know where they're going to be notified. So we have a Teams chat for accessibility and a Teams chat for SEO. They'll be notified in there when they need to, when it's ready for them to go start fixing things. And we've also given a cheat sheet for each of those processes as well. So it's kind of like, if you need to fix alt text, if you need to fix link text, this is how it works in our content management system. We meet the same time on every other week. So it alternates between accessibility and tech SEO. So we just know, for us, it's a Tuesday afternoon. Every other Tuesday afternoon, we'll either be doing tech SEO or accessibility. And that's another of those tips. If you can emulate another process or try and follow any other ways of working you already have, that can really make it nice and easy to integrate into a team's way of working. What we also did was we started off with not giving the team absolutely every issue. We started off with maybe 5 or 6 different types of issues. Once we were comfortable with that, we started adding in more every month. Um, so the types of issues that they'd be expected to fix. Also, because we're doing this on a regular basis, we get to the point that some months we're not finding huge amounts of things. So it's becoming a much smaller monthly task, which is absolutely great. But it's also keeping the entire team engaged in um, knowing what to look for and how to fix it. So we've got our systems going, and then AbilityNet released their digital accessibility maturity model. And we started to measure ourselves against it and identify any areas we needed to focus on. I've put a link to it on the slide if you want to go have a look. I was in the session this morning, and Alistair mentioned the W3C maturity model, and there are other ones out there as well. And I think there's a session later in the week as well. So kind of find a maturity model that works for you. Um, it really helped us go from a list of this is everything we want to do in the accessibility space to this is a roadmap for what we're going to implement and when and the best order to do it in. It also highlighted some areas we hadn't even considered or thought of. So we've set up our processes, we're working through audit, and we've worked out where we are on the maturity model. We started tackling those other sites I mentioned earlier. Some of them are much smaller, some are only a couple of pages. But we then were coming up with more development tickets as well. But because we have those processes in place, it's made it much easier that we know, right, this is the audit, this is what happens after the audit, this is how we get these into sprints after that. Meanwhile, our accessibility champions were starting to put together advice and guidance that they could share with their colleagues. So they put together some video guidelines and social media guidelines. And again, that was breaking down either the WCAG guidelines or other best practice that they found elsewhere and putting it together in checklists or one pages that put it in the RNLI context, um, and referred to systems and programs that we use, to make it as simple as possible for their colleagues to make sure the content they were making was accessible. So now that we have got our champions working on things, we've got all those processes, there's still a huge amount of people that we hadn't quite reached yet. Um, to start with our champions, we met once a month and we tried to work through the priorities as a group. However, it meant that sometimes there wasn't much for some champions to do in their area, and we didn't want them to get disengaged. So, what we found is the best way that works for us is we've divided the accessibility champions into 3 different working groups, and each working group focuses on moving us one step up the maturity model in a different area. So we have a group that focuses on awareness, training, and comms. We have a group that focuses on audits, and we have a group that focuses on guidelines and advice. They each have their own set of objectives that they then break down into kind of what they're going to work on, and other things that they want to feed in. So, especially around kind of that awareness training and comms, there's quite a lot of freedom to come up with initiatives they want to do. Um, They then meet on a monthly basis and discuss progress and next steps. And then we have the champions have a whole meeting, everyone together every other month, and we hear industry updates, updates from each working group. We might take part in some group learning together, or we might discuss best practice. So, for example, the other month we started talking about AI and accessibility. Um, that is the next top tip is dividing the champions into working groups and giving them concrete objectives keeps our champions at least keeps them engaged, focused, and the output from the champions network has dramatically increased since we did that. One of the things that they produced was a digital accessibility intranet page. It explains accessibility and its importance. It hosts all our internal guidance. We link out to useful external tools, and it also explains Sculpt. So, Sculpt is a simple process anyone can use to increase accessibility of all their communications and documents, and it was developed by Worcestershire County Council. All their resources are freely available on their website. I really encourage you to go check it out. And the aim of it is to make accessibility accessible. So it breaks it down into 6 things that people can remember. So it's things like structure, color contrast, use of images, um, links, plain English, and tables. And it's kind of breaking it down. If you're only going to think about 6 things, think about these 6 ones. Last year, the champions started to host workshops. So, for example, they did a workshop with our IT team looking at raising awareness of accessibility, but also focusing on assistive technology and the assistive technology within mobile phones, because we know that's something that will interest our IT team, and we use that as a hook to get them a bit more interested and do more research and approach us. And we also arranged a 10-minute quick intro to accessibility. And we approached the executive assistant of every single directorate and said, can we come and crash one of your team meetings, please, to talk about accessibility? We're nearly there. We've nearly got to every directorate. I think we've got about 2 or 3 left to do. But from those presentations, we started to receive requests for help and support on accessibility with different projects, pieces of work. Sometimes it might be a whole project someone wants checking, sometimes it's an app, sometimes it's a poster. But we now have people thinking, oh, there's somewhere I can go to ask this and I need to think about it. So that's absolutely brilliant in starting to get people to think about it. I've mentioned a couple of times that we really want to try and stop those accessibility issues before they happen. So what we did was we started to work with our creative team to check any new component designs before they went into development. So we were checking them from kind of a real wireframe stage, just a visual design stage, and then we would also check on them at the quality assurance, user acceptance testing, and production stages of our sprints as well. Um, to help keep our skill levels up as well, what we started to do is divide those checks between the champions and our digital team, um, because we don't have something to do every month. So we're trying to kind of share it out to make sure people keep those skill levels high. Our creative team is also developing a design system, and that's going to allow us to have the confidence that every component has been accessibility tested before it gets onto the design system. And if we do need to make any changes, it will be from that single source. Um, and we can also then provide accessibility advice alongside our brand and design guidelines. So anyone going in to for example, look at our brand colors. It explains color contrast alongside that, and it also tells them which colors have been approved from a color contrast point of view as well. And we've started identifying teams that we can work with to make sure they're considering accessibility as early as possible. For example, our experience team, our project management, business analyst teams, data governance teams. We speak to them all and try and make sure that they're thinking about accessibility right from the start of a project. And at the moment, we're currently working to make sure that all of our project management documentation and processes include accessibility. And that's for both our own products and anything that we customize from off the shelf products as well. And that's the next top tip is if you can catch it earlier, it often makes things easier and sometimes cheaper than finding it once you've already released it as well. At the moment, the big thing we're working on is identifying all the different teams that we haven't already worked with across the organization and seeing how we can link up with them on accessibility. So, for example, data governance. Uh, One of our data governance principles is that data is a shareable asset. And our data governance team consider that that means it has to be accessible too. If it's not accessible, then it's not shareable with everyone. Um, so that's been brilliant because we work closely with that team now to support each other with messaging. So, for example, we can say, have you added the data classification to your document? And at the same time, have you checked it against Sculpt, which is the Worcestershire County Council scheme I mentioned earlier. Similarly, we can do it the other way around. We can be giving an accessibility message and saying, have you checked the accessibility? And at the same time, have you checked the data governance classification as well? We talked about search engine marketing earlier. So there's a lot of crossover between good technical SEO practices and accessibility best practice. And because both of those sit within a digital team, we've been able to align those processes like we talked about earlier. We've worked with a lot of teams, we've still got a lot to go, but we're either helping to get them started with accessible testing, including accessibility requirements in their projects, or providing top tips in their work as well. So we've worked with, as I mentioned, the UX team, our project management, applications, but we've even worked with PR, our volunteering teams, and there's still places we want to go as well. So that's one of the things we're working on. But that's the top tip is to find those areas where you overlap and that you can share that messaging. It means you're not duplicating work, but it also makes things as simple as possible for the end user. They're getting one message rather than it coming from lots of different places. So where are we going? Um, at the moment, we're working with our learning and development team to put together a training package that is kind of more specific to our context. We want to make sure it's included as part of inductions, but we're also developing bite-sized training for specific topics, like for a content producer or videos, using Sculpt, social media, things like that. We're also looking at how we can develop a competence framework for our accessibility champions based on the UK Government Digital and Data Profession Capability Framework, and I've popped the link on the slide there for you as well. So this looks at kind of different levels of accessibility specialists. So we're looking at that with our digital team, with champions in mind. And also we're starting to think about whether there's a role for our volunteers to be accessibility ambassadors. So that's probably going to be more of a role of raising awareness rather than making them carry out audits or kind of having any responsibility for fixing issues. It will be more of making people consider accessibility in their volunteering roles. And that's the final tip is don't start from scratch. There is loads of useful resources out there that you can adapt to work for your organization. I've tried to kind of credit them through this where you can go to find more information. Um, but yeah, you don't have to start processes from scratch. You can usually find something you can adapt out there. So how are we doing? So each year we want to monitor how we're doing. Are we actually having an impact on our staff and volunteers? So every year we put a survey on our intranet homepage for about a month, and it's giving us a rough indication of how we're doing. Numbers aren't particularly high considering how large our organisation is, but it's at least giving us a benchmark. So if we can increase the numbers doing this, at least we've got a rough idea from where we started. So we ask, in your RNLI role, are you familiar with digital accessibility and do you implement it across your work? What we found is that we've reduced the number of people who aren't aware at all. And then we've increased the number who are aware and who are also using the resources. However, we've kind of got this ground in the middle of people thinking it's not relevant and being unsure of how they can apply it to their role. So that's something that we need to focus on. So I just wanted to revisit the top 10 tips that we've covered. So loads of brilliant free resources out there to help you learn. You don't need to spend a lot of money. There's absolutely tons out there. Using a scoring matrix to prioritize your issues, accessibility issues for development can be really helpful. You can, again, you can adapt or create something yourself that works for your environment. If you can attach accessibility requirements and fixes to existing planned development, then that's going to get things done a lot more efficiently and a lot quicker. Try and identify those points where you might get accessibility issues coming from, such as content creators, and engage them in accessibility as soon as you can. If you can build automated testing into a regular process and get the whole team involved, it keeps skill levels up and helps people spot potential issues. Using a maturity model is really, really helpful to kind of give yourself a roadmap. Dividing your champions into working groups might work for you. Giving them a few concrete objectives keeps everyone engaged and focused. Catching accessibility issues as early as possible is brilliant. Finding those overlaps with other teams so you don't duplicate work and you're trying to make things as simple as possible for the end user. And don't start from scratch. There are loads of resources available out there. There's loads of free resources out there, and you can adapt things to work for your organization. So thank you very much for going through the RNLI accessibility journey with me. If you want to contact me to find out more, my email address is there. It's Catherine_Weston@rnli.org.uk. I'm also on LinkedIn. If you have any questions, I will do my best to answer them. So back to you, Henry.
Amazing, thank you, Catherine. Yeah, what a great talk, and yeah, such a journey you've been on. It's really interesting to see how you're tackling accessibility. Yeah, as Catherine says, if anyone has any questions, please do submit them. Catherine, you mentioned you did all of this with kind of no extra budget or resource. Like,
Yes.
how did you get buy-in on this? Like, have you got any advice around that at all?
Yes. So, as I said at the start, we haven't got a separate budget for this. It's all part of kind of the existing sprint budget, existing project budget, or and in terms of resource, it's all part of those digital team roles or getting the champions on board, and they kind of do that alongside their day job. Um, the way to get buy-in I found is to explain the why and link it to our organizational objectives as well. So linking them to organizational objectives and saying, well, this is how we're helping you achieve these objectives you've set out for the next 5 or 10 years is really, really helpful. And the explaining why. So we explain in all of our talks what disability can be, that it can be permanent, temporary, situational, and the model, and saying, actually, we work on the social model. And if someone wants to apply for a job and they meet the criteria, they have a CV, they have an internet connection, they're ready to upload it, and our form breaks, that's not their problem. That's our fault, and we've been inaccessible. And I think trying to link it to really concrete examples of what we do. So we often link it to fundraising or volunteering or applying for a job or safety information as well. That's a key bit of what we do. That's super helpful to get buy-in as well, because you're showing how it's going to affect uh, anyone we're talking to, how it affects their role directly, and how we can help them with their role.
Brilliant, thank you. So we've got a few questions that have popped up. First one here from Richard, just saying, do you have any dedicated roles for accessibility? And just asking about your role and how you kind of managed to dedicate so much time to it.
Yeah, so no, we don't. We have 5 digital producers who all kind of have some responsibility for accessibility, but my role took the lead on it. So each of the producers will have a lead for something, and accessibility is part of mine. Um, and I would say there was possibly more resource needed to set it up, and that was assigned to me as a project to set up initially. Whereas now we're in that monthly process, it's a lot easier. We now have the champions as well, so I can kind of share auditing. It's not just 1 or 2 people doing an audit anymore. We can kind of share it out about among maybe 10 people can do a sample. Um, so yeah, it had to be assigned as a project to start, but now it kind of fits in as well. around everything else, which isn't always ideal, but again, it is still assigned on my kind of time for the year, I guess, in terms of our plan for the year. Accessibility is still kind of marked out as a certain amount of my time. Yeah.
Awesome, thank you. So we've got a question here from Bryony.
Mhm.
Bryony asks, how do you measure or report on the impact of the accessibility improvements you make, particularly for senior leaders to get that buy-in or budget?
Yes. So I'm sure a lot of you have come across this. It's very, very hard to kind of measure impact because a lot of the reporting tools we use you can't like use Google Analytics, for example, and work out how many people are using a screen reader. It's just not possible. So what we do is we measure more our output. So, for example, I do a monthly report where I will show how many issues have been fixed, how many audits, like how far through we are with audits, how many outstanding issues we have, and I break that down of kind of level A, double A, triple A. Um, our accessibility score, if you have a program that will give you an accessibility score. What else do we include in there? Um, and we also show that slide that I showed you about asking people how many people are aware, but we constantly link it back where we can. So I think it was a talk last year. I can't quite remember which conference it was, but there is a piece of work that's been done in the Netherlands looking at how many accessibility features have been turned on in iPhones. And they're also looking at Android phones as well. And that is super helpful as an example, saying, I can't give you the exact numbers of our users, but nationally, here is approximately how many people might be using this feature. And if we're not accessible, it means X, Y, Z to the piece of work that that senior leader might be responsible for. And it's kind of tying it in that way. So it's very hard to do, but there are kind of ways of showing progress. Yeah.
Brilliant, thank you. So just looking at some more questions. So Sharon asks about the amount of accessibility champions you have, and kind of, yeah, like just asking about how much time they've got on this. Like, is it part of their job description or just an add-on to their usual roles? Or
Yes. So numbers vary. I haven't done a count recently. That's a really good question. I'm going to estimate we probably have about 30. That's a very rough guess. But some are more involved than others. And how we have initially started was we approached the managers of certain teams and we said, we would like you to nominate someone. And then that role might get passed on to other people. Um, we do have a certain amount of churn as well. But again, working closely with our data governance team, we've learned that's not necessarily a bad thing because then you're training more people on accessibility and more people have that awareness as well. Um, so sometimes people say, I'm really sorry, I can't work on this year. So we'll just ask them, can you send another member of your team? And we welcome anyone back. We'll have anyone if they want to be a champion, anyone can join. Um, so yes, it is part of their job. It's not necessarily in their job description. Um, but what we try to do is link it as closely as possible. So, for example, anyone who works on training is in that training and awareness group. And therefore, some of the stuff they're doing should naturally be part of their job anyway, because they should be making their training accessible. So, that's kind of the way we've approached it and how we've explained it to people. Um, the other thing that we are working on, just lost my train of thought. Uh, champions, how to keep, yes, that's it. So we are currently mapping out every team in the organization and working out what we think their responsibility for accessibility is. And then we are going to try and see if we can get that into job descriptions. It might take a while. It might not be possible everywhere, but we want to, it's on that accessibility maturity model by AbilityNet, is to make sure it's in job descriptions. So that's what we're going to try and do.
brilliant, thank you. So we've got a question here from Douglas. Douglas says, during your journey, it sounds like you've created a number of internal portals, intranets, and sites to document, share, and collaborate accessibility resources, components, and issues. How do you prevent all these different sites from becoming outdated, stagnant, or a duplication of work while moving forward? Do you spend time specifically to manage these areas to keep them relevant and up to date?
Yes, so they all have slightly different purposes. So, for example, that team site is mainly going to be used by people using it very regularly. So, it is people actually doing audits. The champions drop things in. So, at the moment, they're keeping everything they're working on to do with the training in there. It's probably not used much more widely than that, to be honest. The idea originally was everyone in the organization would be able to access it. In reality, everyone in the organization isn't going to be doing an audit, so they probably don't need it. Um, Yammer is much more, or Viva Engage is much more of a kind of pushing out communication channel or trying to get people to have that conversation. So that's much more where we'll drop. I've read this article. There's a webinar coming up that you might want to sign up to. So that's much more of a news type thing. And then our intranet page is much more of a um, kind of I've stumbled across this page maybe from some other part of the organization, or I'm specifically looking for what brand colors have the right color contrast, or I'm looking for the right person to speak to. So they all have a slightly different audience. And that also, keeping everything up to date, would sit with our awareness training and comms working group. So kind of whenever we get something new, I'll try and say, oh, have you popped it on Viva Engage? Have you popped it on our intranet page? So that's kind of how we try and make it a group task to keep everything up to date.
Brilliant, thank you. So we've got a couple of questions from Liz here. First of all, Liz asked, did you develop your scoring matrix from scratch? And Liz also asks, how did you undertake your initial audit? Did you use automation tools for this?
Oh, great question. So, yes and no to the scoring matrix. Yes, I developed it from scratch, but I adapted it from a development matrix we already had and were using. However, I've asked colleagues. I can't find any reference to whether we set that up ourselves or whether we got that from somewhere. But you can kind of create one yourself depending on anything that you think is important, or you consider during dev time. So for example, you might want to look at, is it an easy thing to do or is it a hard thing to do? Are you going to weight that higher or lower? Also, I kind of played around with it a bit. So when I set it up, I'd kind of put a few test cases and go through and go, "Oh, that's not quite working right for how we do things. So I'm going to adjust the weighting." But you could definitely add more things in. You could take things out. It's and it's also not set in stone. It's nothing that you're going to go back to and go, "Oh, I didn't score that correctly. I should have scored it a 20 and I scored it as a 19." It is just something that gives you a rough idea of where to start. Sorry, and the second part of the question was, so it's scoring matrix and
Second part of the question was, how did you undertake your initial audit? Did you use automation tools?
yes. So the initial audit, we do it very differently today. We had a massive spreadsheet. It was a template we had taken, I think it was from the government digital service, might have been from somewhere else. And it kind of had pages down the side and criteria across the top. We quickly learned afterwards that we needed some way of recording things more in depth. So we now, rather than just saying yes or no as a pass, we actually put comments and things, and we have like a page per spreadsheet bit. Um, we do use automated tools, but limited. So we use a site improve browser extension to run some things, like just to check the code for like the HTML bits, to check aria, things like that, things that we didn't, especially as where we were starting from, we did not have the expertise to do some of the more complicated checks. So we use it for that. We use it for color contrast, but we also know now what our color contrast works. We know we've got a limited palette and these are the ones that work. So almost by eye, you can go through and go, nope, 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 yes. Um, but we also try to do it, a lot of it, manually. And we also test with a screen reader. We taught ourselves to use a screen reader. We know that's not perfect because we are not people who use screen readers every day, but it gives us a starting point. And that's one of the other things that we want to start looking at eventually is, can we start doing accessible user testing. Um, we're just we're just starting to get some maturity to be able to consider that. But we did it mostly manually. And if possible, I think the recommendation is usually try and follow a user journey rather than kind of do things in isolation. So it's kind of a mix of both, really.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. I think we've got time for just about one more question. So Sharon here asks, as you've increased awareness over time within your organization, have you been able to keep up with demand for accessibility help from other teams?
It varies. It's usually if we've done like a sequence of talks in a couple of weeks, then you'll have an influx. But that was the great thing about setting up a working group specifically for audits. It meant we could then, it wasn't just our digital team. We also had a group of volunteer staff who would take on some of that auditing as well. And also now I look at it much more as an opportunity of, right, great. I know these people haven't done an audit in a while. I can assign it to them and keep their skills up. Or, oh, great, this has come in. I've got some new champions I need to train. So I will use that as the training material and we'll complete the audit as part of training. So um, it's been manageable. I guess it depends on the size of your organization and how quickly you're raising awareness. But usually, I really try. That was something I had to learn, was being able to delegate, because I love accessibility so much and I love working on it. I wanted to try and do it all myself, but actually it's sharing it out among the champions means it's much easier, and it's also that kind of the risk of it sitting with one person. I want to try and make sure as many people have that knowledge so it's not reliant on just one person or a couple of people.
Amazing. Thank you. Thank you so much, Catherine. That was, yeah, such a great session. And yeah, thank you for sharing your journey with us.
No worries.
Thank you to everyone else that tuned in. I'm sure if anyone else has any more questions, they can contact you directly on LinkedIn.
Mhm.
And thanks for everyone that joined. Yeah, so up next we have Beverly Newing from the UK's Ministry of Justice at 3 p.m, just over an hour's time. There's still time to sign up for that one if you haven't done so yet. You can do that over on our Eventbrite page. Hope to see you all back then. And yeah, thanks again, Catherine.
Thank you.